Well, welcome back this week to another analysis behind the news. I mentioned last week that I didn't have enough time to get into Obama's preschool plan. It was the White House details preschool plan. Well, they have other plans as well. I was just in Chicago over the weekend and noticed in the Sunday Chicago Tribune that Rahm Emanuel and President Obama had both come out with programs for sex education in the schools. And it seems as though they're going to teach them very early on, in Chicago at least, how to be involved in transgender and homosexuality issues. It's gotten so bad we have written an article about it from the state of Massachusetts about transgender rules in the schools in that state. Actually, it reads like a parody, but it's not. They're actually true. That if a young boy starts to feel like he's a girl, then you have to open up the changing rooms and the girls' facilities to this poor mixed up little boy. Just let your mind wander from there. But at any rate, the thing about it is that that's things that should not be taught in schools. We could have just one broadcast alone on that subject. Just let me tell you this part, and that is between the ages of 5 and puberty, you do not want to get kids involved in this sort of thing. It will debilitate mentally down the road individuals on a percentage basis, not everybody, but on a percentage basis it'll mix them up terribly. It's what's known as the latency period, plus or minus 5, plus or minus puberty. The latency period where the individual is not interested in that sort of thing. Oh, I don't want to play with girls. I don't want to play with boys. And if you force them into study of this sort of thing and bring all these things that are involved in sex education, in that time period, you're going to mix up some of them. They won't know what they are. They will not have a pleasurable life later on as a result, percentage-wise. But you see, the thing is that a lot of this is based on ObamaCare, and this is the new law. And if you go to section subtitle L, maternal and child health services, maternal and child health services, and then you go to part 2, national strategy to improve health care quality, and then you start to see the interagency working group on health care quality. And you start to see that what they're talking about in Obamacare is not what you and I think of as medicine. This is how to raise children, to check up on the quality of education they're getting, and have all these agencies of the federal government, literally all of the agencies of the federal government, involved in a test program to see if they can get rid of stress and how to educate kids in the home and as well as in the schools, et cetera, all by the federal government. They're going to start marching into areas with clipboards in their hands to start testing little kids to see whether or not you're raising them correctly. And that's all part of this program. I'd like to talk more about it, but it would take a great deal of time to get into it. One of the things that I wanted to point out was, you know, they talk about free trade. It's not free and it's not trade. It has everything to do with convergence, with getting communities together. It is now a two-ocean program of Obama, if you will, to form a free trade area in the Atlantic and a free trade area in the Pacific. But in reality, it's convergence. As I mentioned last week, all it takes is one piece of paper signed by the governments saying we will not interfere with your businesses if you don't interfere with our businessmen, and that's it. Just go for free trade. That's free trade, where we don't interfere, where we don't have rules and regulations and caveats and everything else. Where we don't start to merge all the various environmental regulations, policing, military, banking, on and on and on, which is in these various things they're talking about. They're talking for months and months and years on getting a deal put together. Well, what kind of a deal do you need to make if it's really free trade? Now, here is, I'd forgotten about this last week, here is the business card of the head of the EC at the time, the European Union, public relations man in Bonn, Germany. And I sat with him and interviewed him with another staff member of the John Birch Society. And that man told us that, look, the EU, as it became, is going to be bigger than the United States in geography, population, and economically, and we are going to drag you into the EU whether you like it or not. Very arrogant about it. Now, we were there as reporters, if you will. Now, do you think that that statement that he made was only made to us? He probably made it to a number of other journalists from the United States. Not a word of it ever got into the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and that sort of thing, of the idea that we were going to become part of that mess. Frankly, you know, they're already doing it with the Federal Reserve, sending money to the EU to try and bail all those people out, all these banking houses and the governments of Greece and Spain and so on and so forth. It's the kind of thinking that you see here with John McCain. I don't get this kind of thinking, I'm sorry. But Hagel opponents say vote should go on. Let me read you what this man has to say. It's incredible that anybody ever nominated him for President of the United States. Quote, "No, I don't believe he's qualified," speaking of Hagel. Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona, said of his former Senate colleague. Quote, "But I don't believe that we should hold up his nomination any further, because I think it's been a reasonable amount of time to have questions answered." Now, for all of you in business or in management or anything of that nature, I don't like your resume because, you know, it doesn't look like you're qualified for the job that you're interviewing for in my company. And we've had a lot of questions raised, but this thing is dragging out too long. Even if you're not qualified, I'll hire you for the job. Does that make any sense? But that's what John McCain is saying. This is dragged on too long. You're not qualified, you're not answering our questions, but hey, we'll nominate you anyway. So much for Republican opposition and oversight. It's ridiculous. Another thing that we see is report traces hacking to China's army. Gee, the New York Times just woke up to this fact when people have been saying it for years, that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army of China, has been hacking into all these computers all around the world, stealing secrets, stealing names, personal records, on and on and on. They say that, well, they've traced it to a certain neighborhood. They can't absolutely say it's the People's Liberation Army, but the only thing in that neighborhood is a 12-story white office tower wherein sits the People's Liberation cyber personnel, the people that do all of their cyber work. At any rate, they're cyber warriors, as they call them. And but that's the source to a lot of this. I wonder how many of those were from actually came from the hackers that went into the Pentagon and places like that through the internet. Don't know. Briefly, it's not anything new, but we see that the government of Afghanistan doesn't want our men in certain areas of Afghanistan any longer. They want them to get out of there, have no more military maneuvers or missions in those areas, that sort of thing. Here's what you call freedom in Russia, very briefly. They are now on the road to passing a bill that no Russian can have a foreign bank account or take money out of the country and that sort of thing out of Russia. And the upper chamber, or excuse me, the lower chamber of the Parliament on Friday last voted 443 to 0 to implement this law. Now they have to vote on it 3 times before it becomes a law. But 443 to 0 voted that no Russian can take assets out of the country. Is that freedom? Obviously, they don't have a Ron Paul in their parliament because it had been 442 to 1. But at any rate, that's the sort of thing that you see happening more and more in Russia, that they are not allowing assets to leave Russia, but we want an agreement with the United States to bring a lot of assets into Russia. And now you see also Medvedev visiting Raul Castro in Cuba before he meets with Obama to cement the ties with these communist states and so on and so forth. The world is rather a crazy place, isn't it? And we try to bring some of these things to you, and we always talk about the problem. What is the solution? Well, go to the rest of our website. You'll find the solution there. And browse through to see our action programs on many of these issues. And get involved. It's time to get involved. These things are too important. They're too crazy. Let's bring a little sanity to politics. Let's do it together. Till next week, we'll see you then.